They built 31 cabins on my private peninsula, and my revenge plan was simple. Let them finish. I watched as the HOA president smirked, calling me a squatter, while her bulldozers tore through the rose garden I planted for my late wife. This was more than land. It was a memorial, and they were spitting on it. They waved their fake surveys in my face at a public meeting, laughing as they humiliated me. But what they didn't know was their entire multi-million-dollar project was built on a single, fatal lie, a secret that had been buried in the dirt for 40 years. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because you're about to see a bully get exactly what she deserves. And if you believe that no HOA should have the power to destroy a family's legacy, hit subscribe so you never miss another story of justice being served. The morning air still smelled of pine and sawdust, the way it always did. I was sanding the edge of a new window frame for the cabin, feeling the smooth grain of the cedar under my fingertips. Every piece of this place was built by my own two hands, over decades, for my wife, Eleanor. This peninsula wasn't just property, it was a promise. When the chemo had taken her strength, the quiet lapping of the lake against the shore had given some of it back. We'd sit on the porch for hours, just listening. She called it our sanctuary. After she passed, finishing the cabin became my life's work, a testament to her, to us. My retirement was supposed to be spent here, surrounded by the quiet hum of memory and the satisfaction of a job well done. But that morning, a different sound cut through the peace. The crunch of tires on the gravel road leading to my gate. I rarely had visitors. Most of the folks in the Lakeview Meadows development next door kept to themselves, respecting the old stone wall and the private property sign my grandfather had put up 60 years ago. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked toward the gate. A polished sedan, the kind that never sees a dirt road, was parked just outside. Standing beside it was a woman in a crisp pantsuit, holding a clipboard like a weapon. Flanking her were two men, younger, also holding clipboards, looking stiff and important. I recognized the woman, Marla Trent, the new HOA president. I'd seen her picture in the community newsletter, always with a strained, professional smile. That smile was on her face now, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Halpern," she said, her voice sharp and coated in fake friendliness. "I'm Marla Trent with the Lakeview Homeowners Association. These gentlemen are with our planning committee." I didn't open the gate. I just stood on my side of the line, hands resting on the iron bars. "I know who you are. The HOA doesn't have any business this far down the point." Her smile tightened a fraction. "Actually, that's what we're here to discuss. The board has voted to move forward with the Lakefront Community Initiative. We'll be repurposing this unused peninsula for the construction of 31 community lake cabins." I felt a cold stillness spread through my chest. I looked past her, toward the woods where Eleanor and I used to walk. I could see them then, small pink flags on thin metal stakes, dotted between the trees, creeping closer and closer to the cabin. I hadn't noticed them before. An engineer's mind sees lines and boundaries, and these were a blatant violation. "Repurposing?" I asked, my voice flat. "This isn't unused land. This is my land. This whole peninsula is my land." Marla let out a little laugh, a sound like ice cubes rattling in an empty glass. She tapped her clipboard. "Our records disagree, Mr. Halpern. The plat map on file with the association clearly shows this parcel as designated community property." The two men behind her nodded in unison, like cheap bobbleheads. "My grandfather bought this land. My father built the first fishing dock. I built this cabin for my dying wife. These facts were as solid as the foundation beneath my feet." "I have the deed," I said, "and the original county survey maps. They're in the house." I wasn't asking for a fight. I was stating a fact, engineer to bureaucrat, expecting logic to prevail. That was my first mistake. Marla's world wasn't built on logic. It was built on power. "I'm sure you have all sorts of interesting old documents," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But the official filings are what matter. The board has approved the budget, the plans are finalized, and our contractor is scheduled to break ground tomorrow morning." She was looking over my shoulder at the cabin, not as a home, but as an obstacle. I saw her eyes flick over the rose bushes Eleanor had planted by the porch, the ones I still tended to every week. Her gaze was dismissive, as if she were mentally calculating the cost to bulldoze them. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a hostile takeover. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice low but clear. "You, your committee, and any contractor you send. You are not to set foot past this gate." For the first time, her smile vanished completely. It was replaced by a cold, hard look. "You need to understand your position here. The community has decided. You can either cooperate, or you can be dealt with as a squatter. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 a.m. to begin clearing the site." She didn't wait for a response. She and her 2 clipboard soldiers turned, got back in their shiny car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust that settled on the gate like a final insult. I stood there for a long time, looking at those little pink flags. Each one felt like a nail driven into Eleanor's memory. I went inside and pulled out the old military lockbox where I kept our most important papers. There it was, the original deed, the faded plat map from the county, showing the Peninsula line clear as day. I ran my thumb over my grandfather's signature. This was proof. Solid, irrefutable proof. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of righteous anger, preparing my case for the morning. I'd show them the deed. I'd call the county assessor. I would stop them. They couldn't just steal a man's life's work. They couldn't just pave over a sanctuary. I woke up before dawn, the papers laid out on the kitchen table, my arguments rehearsed in my mind. But I didn't hear a knock at the gate. I heard something else, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I walked to the window, my heart sinking with every step. There, in the soft morning light, was the source of the sound. Not one, but 2 yellow bulldozers, their engines idling. They weren't at the gate. They had driven right past it, tearing up the path. They were already on my land, their steel tracks leaving deep wounds in the earth just yards from Eleanor's roses. They were about to break ground. My first instinct was to run out there, wave the deed in the driver's face, and stand in front of the machine. But I'm not a fool. An old man against a 10-ton bulldozer is a story that ends one way, and it's not with the old man winning. This wasn't a problem to be solved with muscle. It was a paper problem. I trusted in the system I'd served my whole life. There were rules, there were records, and there was a right way to do things. With the roar of the engines in the background, I went inside, my hands shaking just slightly, and dialed the county assessor's office. I explained the situation calmly, giving my parcel number and name. I could hear the clerk typing on her keyboard, a bored, rhythmic clicking. "Halpern. Right," she said, her voice flat, like she was reading off a grocery list. "Okay, I'm looking at parcel 7B. Yep, the Peninsula. It looks like that was consolidated with the Lakeview Meadows community plat last year." My blood ran cold. "Consolidated? That's impossible. I have the original deed right here. It's my name, my family's name for 60 years. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a person who deals with confused old men all day. "Sir, I'm just telling you what the official record says. As of last May, that land belongs to the HOA. The phone felt heavy in my hand. It was like calling the hospital and being told you'd been declared dead last May, and nothing you said could change it. I hung up, the drone of the bulldozers outside suddenly feeling 10 times louder, 10 times more final. For a moment, panic threatened to swamp me, but discipline kicks in when you need it. I forced myself to breathe. The county was wrong. A clerk had made a mistake. I just needed to show them the real proof. I walked over to the old military issue lockbox, tucked away in my closet. It was heavy, olive drab, and cold to the touch. The lock clicked open with a familiar sound, and the smell of old paper and ink filled the small room. I carefully lifted out the file containing the deed. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, the lines from the county clerk's typewriter still sharp and black. The 1983 transfer date was right there. Below it, a plat map drawn with an engineer's precision showing the clear boundary line that separated my peninsula from the development. This was it. This was salvation. You can't argue with a document like this. Hope, sharp and clear, cut through the dread. I found the number for a local real estate attorney someone had mentioned at the hardware store, a guy named Bill Peterson who'd been around forever. I got an appointment for that afternoon. Sitting in his dusty office, surrounded by stacks of legal books, I felt that hope begin to curdle. I laid the deed and the map on his desk. He looked at them with a practiced eye, running a finger over the boundary line. He listened patiently as I explained everything: Marla, Trent, the bulldozers, the call to the assessor. When I was finished, he leaned back in his creaky leather chair and looked at me with weary, sympathetic eyes. "Tom," he said, and I knew from his tone it was bad news. "The deed is real. The map is real. The problem is, what they did is probably, on paper, legal." He explained it in simple terms. No fancy lawyer talk. The HOA had hired a slick firm to exploit an old, obscure loophole called clerical consolidation. They'd commissioned a new survey, a fake one, he suspected, that simply absorbed my land into their master plat. They filed it quietly, no public notice required, and the understaffed county office had rubber-stamped it. "It's a form of paper theft," Peterson said, shaking his head. "They count on guys like you not having the $20,000, $30,000 it'll take to fight their corporate lawyers in court for 2 years. By the time you get a judge to even look at it, the cabins will be built and sold." The air left my lungs. The system I had trusted hadn't just failed me, it had been used as the weapon to rob me. When I got home, they had already put up a chain-link fence, a brutal, silver gash across the landscape, cutting me off from the main part of the peninsula. My boat ramp, the one my dad and I built, was on the other side. They'd posted a sign, "Community property, no trespassing." The next day, I found a bright orange fine taped to my front door. $100 for encroachment of personal effects onto community grounds. They were fining me for my own woodshed. It was a calculated cruelty, designed to break me down piece by piece. The final, crushing blow came a week later. I was sitting on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee, when one of the bulldozers turned its attention toward the cabin. I thought they were just clearing more brush, but then it lowered its blade. I watched, frozen, as the machine chewed into the earth right where Eleanor's rose garden had been. The roots of the bushes she'd babied through 2 seasons of chemo were torn from the ground and pushed aside like trash. They didn't just take the land. They took the last, living things she had planted. They bulldozed her memory to make way for a gravel access road. That night, something inside me broke, or maybe it was forged into something new. The shock was gone. The hurt was gone. The part of me that wanted to reason with them was dead and buried under that gravel. I walked down to the small dock I still had access to, the old lockbox in my hand. I sat on the edge as dusk settled over the lake, the water turning to black glass. I pulled out the deed, its paper soft in my calloused hands. It wasn't just a claim to the land anymore. It was a promise. They thought I was a broken old man, beaten by paperwork and bureaucracy. They thought they had won. I looked across the water at the skeletons of the first cabin frames rising against the sunset. A quiet resolve settled over me, as cold and still as the lake. Let them build. Every nail they drive into their own coffin. The anger didn't burn hot. It cooled into something dense and patient. An engineer doesn't get mad at a problem. He studies it, finds the tolerances, and identifies the stress points. The HOA was now my problem, and I began to study it with a cold, methodical focus. Months bled into one another. Summer turned to fall, the vibrant green of the trees around the lake mellowing to gold and rust. The constant soundtrack to my life became the whine of saws, the pop of nail guns, and the rumble of cement trucks. From my porch, I had a perfect view of their progress. I watched as they poured 31 identical concrete slabs, then raised the skeletons of 31 identical cabins. To everyone else, I had become the ghost of the peninsula, a bitter old man who had lost his fight. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away, their faces tight with a mixture of pity and fear. Marla Trent had made an example of me, and no one wanted to be next. They saw me puttering in my small workshop or sitting on my dock, and they assumed I was defeated. They were wrong. I was. Documenting. Every morning, just after the sun came up and before the work crews arrived, I would send up the drone. It was a small, quiet one, barely a hum against the whisper of the wind over the lake. From 200 feet up, I captured crystal clear footage of their progress. Each video was time-stamped, dated, and saved to a hard drive, filed away in a folder labeled Evidence. I mapped their every move, from the laying of the first utility lines to the nailing of the last roof shingle. I wasn't just recording construction, I was recording a crime in high definition. My afternoons were for research. I drove to the county records office once a week, becoming a familiar face to the clerks. I never mentioned the dispute. I just acted like a retiree with a new hobby. I filed Freedom of Information requests for every single permit the HOA had pulled for their lakefront community initiative. The paperwork came back in a thick manila envelope. I spread the documents across my, quote, kitchen table and found exactly what I was looking for. Permit after permit listed a parcel ID, the one for the main Lakeview Meadows development, not the ID for my peninsula. Lot 7B. They were building with legal permits, but on the wrong piece of land. It was a small detail, a single digit off in a long string of numbers, but in engineering, the small details are where foundations crack. My isolation had one advantage. It made my few allies more valuable. Ralph Clevenger was one of them. We'd served in different branches, different decades, but we shared the same quiet understanding that came with a uniform. We'd meet for coffee at a diner 10 miles out of town. Ralph was a retired county surveyor, a man who spoke in terms of elevations and degrees. I slid my old plat map and a copy of the HOA's new survey across the vinyl tabletop. He put on his reading glasses and studied them for a long time, the silence broken only by the clink of coffee cups. Finally, he took a sip and pushed the maps back to me. "Well, Tom," he said with a dry chuckle, "somebody's compass is busted. Your map puts the boundary line right at the old stone wall. Theirs moves it a good 200 feet onto your land to include the entire shoreline." He tapped the HOA's map. "This is sloppy. It's like they just drew a line where they wanted it to be and called it official." In the HOA's monthly newsletter, which still got shoved in my mailbox, Marla Trent was gloating. There was a picture of her in a hard hat, pointing at one of the cabin frames, her smile wide and victorious. She wrote a column calling the project a testament to community investment and referred to the successful reclamation of underutilized common land, making a veiled jab at the bitter old squatter who had tried to stand in the way of progress. Her arrogance was my cover. While she was posing for pictures, I was walking the real property line, the one my grandfather had walked, deep in the brush, half swallowed by thorns and ivy near the shoreline, was something I hadn't thought about in years. It was an old county survey benchmark, a small brass disc set in a concrete post, marking a fixed and legally recognized point. The original surveyors had used it to map out all the lots in this area back in the 40s. The HOA's new convenience survey had conveniently ignored it. I spent a whole weekend carefully clearing the brush around it. I scrubbed the brass plate with a wire brush until the stamped letters were clear. U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. It was still there. It was real. I called Ralph. He came out the next day with his equipment, setting up a tripod over the marker. He took his readings, checked his charts, and then walked over to where I was standing. He looked at the rows of nearly finished cabins, then back at the benchmark, and then at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Tom," he said, his voice quiet but ringing with the weight of absolute certainty. "If that marker's still active in the county system, this whole project's on your land." Ralph confirmed it 2 days later. The benchmark was still active, still the official reference point in the county's master file. This wasn't just a competing survey, it was the difference between fact and fiction. For a brief, naive moment, I thought this was the end of it. All I had to do was show them the proof. The truth, I believed, would be enough. So I put on a clean collared shirt, gathered my documents, the old plat map, Ralph's new photos of the benchmark, a printout of the county's active marker registry, and drove to the next HOA meeting. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and suburban politics. Marla Trent sat at a long table at the front, flanked by her board members, reigning over the room with a plastic gavel and a condescending smile. I waited patiently through the monotonous discussions about lawn maintenance and parking violations. Finally, Marla opened the floor to homeowner comments. I stood up and walked to the microphone at the front of the room. A quiet murmur went through the crowd. I was the ghost of the peninsula, and I had come to haunt them. "My name is Tom Halpern," I said, my voice steady. "Some of you know the situation with my property on the peninsula." Marla's smile tightened into a thin, dismissive line. "Mr. Halpern," she interrupted, her voice dripping with fake patience. "This has been addressed. The board considers the matter closed." I ignored her. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. My neighbors. Some looked hostile, some uncomfortable, most just indifferent. "I have some new information I think the board and this community should see." I calmly walked to the table and laid down the old plat map. I placed the photograph of the rediscovered survey marker next to it. "This is the original county plat map for my property, Lot 7B, I explained, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "And this is a photograph of the official U.S. Geodetic Survey benchmark that establishes the legal boundary, a benchmark your contracted surveyor seems to have missed. According to this legally binding marker, every cabin you are currently building is being built squarely on my private property." For a second, there was a stunned silence. I saw a flicker of doubt on the faces of a couple of the board members, but Marla was a master of controlling a room. She picked up my photograph, held it up with 2 fingers as if it were something dirty, and let out a sharp, theatrical laugh. "A survey marker?" she said, turning to the crowd. "Mr. Halpern, are you serious? You come in here with some dusty old map and a picture of a piece of metal you found in the weeds, and you expect us to halt a multi-million-dollar community investment?" She dropped the photo on the table. "Folks, what you're seeing here is a man who can't accept that he lost. He's become a conspiracy YouTuber with crayons, drawing his own lines on a map because he doesn't like the real one." The crowd tittered. The tension in the room broke, replaced by chuckles of derision. My proof, my solid engineering facts, had been reduced to a joke. My neighbors, people I'd known for years, laughed along with her. Humiliation is a strange thing. It's a heat that starts in your ears and spreads down your neck. I stood there for a moment, the sound of their laughter washing over me. I looked at Marla, who was now basking in the support of her audience, her eyes glittering with triumph. I didn't say another word. I calmly gathered my papers, turned, and walked out of the clubhouse. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just left them to their laughter. That was the moment I realized they weren't just mistaken. They were committed to their lie. Truth wouldn't beat them. It had to be something stronger. The next morning, I found my mailbox smashed, flattened by a baseball bat or a piece of pipe. Later that day, I noticed the window of my workshop was shattered. A rock lay on the floor amidst the broken glass. It was a message, clumsy but clear. "Shut up and go away." Ralph called when he heard. "You should file a police report, Tom," he urged. "This is escalation. It's vandalism." I looked at the shattered glass, the dented mailbox. Part of me wanted to, but a bigger part, the cold, calculating part that was now in control, saw an opportunity. "No," I told him quietly. "Let them." He was silent for a moment. "What's your plan, Tom?" "Let them finish the cabins," I said, the words feeling more certain than anything I'd ever said. "Let them feel safe. Let them feel victorious. Let them drive every nail and connect every wire. Let them invest every last dollar." Their overconfidence was now my greatest asset. They thought I was done. They thought They had beaten the old man into submission. Good. I needed them confident. I recorded the damage with my camera, filed the photos away with the drone footage, and went back to work. I had more research to do. They had just shown me how far they were willing to go. Now, I knew how far I had to go. The public humiliation at the meeting was a gift. It solidified Marla's control and erased any lingering doubts among the homeowners. They saw me as a crank, a harmless old fool who'd been put in his place. Their pity was the perfect camouflage. Behind the scenes, I shifted from gathering evidence to building a weapon. The survey marker was the core of my strategy, but on its own, it was just a piece of metal. I needed to wrap it in the full, undeniable authority of the law. I needed paperwork that couldn't be laughed out of a room. Ralph, feeling the sting of Marla's dismissal of his profession, dug deeper. He pulled the digital records for the HOA's survey. What he found was the critical flaw, the hairline crack in their foundation. The surveyor they'd hired wasn't a fraud. He was just lazy. Instead of doing the field work and locating the physical benchmark, he had pulled GPS coordinates from a cheap, outdated county GIS dataset. It was the digital equivalent of using a wrinkled road map instead of a precision instrument. His entire survey, the very document their claim rested on, was based on a flawed starting point. He'd drawn a perfect map of the wrong piece of land. Armed with this knowledge, I reached out to another old friend, a retired county assessor named Henry Mills. Henry was the kind of man who believed that properly filed documents were the bedrock of civilization. When I laid out the two maps in his cluttered home office, my original and the HOA's, his face hardened. "It's paper theft, Tom," he said, echoing my lawyer's words, but with the fire of an insider's indignation. "They used a bureaucratic shortcut to steal your land, hoping nobody would have the skill or the patience to unravel it." He agreed to help. Over the next few weeks, Henry and I became a two-man audit team. We went to the county archives and pulled certified copies of everything. The original deed transfer from 1983, the parcel maps, the tax records. We got it all notarized, stamped, and sealed with a level of officialdom that would be impossible to dismiss. Then came the masterstroke. The old deed was legally sound, but its property description used landmarks from a bygone era, from the old oak tree to the stone wall. We hired Ralph to create a new legal description, translating those old landmarks into modern GPS coordinates, all anchored to that one, immovable, legally active benchmark. It cost me $200 in filing fees to re-record the updated deed with the county. It was the best $200 I'd ever spent. My old, dusty claim was now fully active in the modern system, with digital coordinates that any surveyor in the country could verify in seconds. My ownership was no longer a matter of history. It was a current, verifiable fact. The final piece was the quietest, but the most powerful. Following my lawyer's grudging advice, I had him draw up a quiet title action. It's a legal document that asks a court to clear up any confusion about who owns a piece of property. It officially named the Lakeview Meadows HOA as trespassers and their entire development as an encroachment. It was a declaration of war, written in the dry, emotionless language of the law. But instead of filing it immediately, I had the lawyer keep it sealed, ready to be submitted at a moment's notice. It was my ace in the hole, a legal hand grenade waiting for me to pull the pin. Meanwhile, the construction on the peninsula reached its final stages. The cabins were no longer skeletons. They had siding, windows, and newly seeded patches of lawn. They looked pristine, profitable, and permanent. The HOA announced a grand, ribbon-cutting ceremony. They invited local press, a few city council members, and the entire community. It was to be Marla Trent's victory lap, a celebration of her vision and power. The day of the ceremony was bright and sunny. I watched from my porch as cars filled the new gravel lot where Eleanor's roses used to be. I saw Marla, dressed in a bright red power suit, greeting people, her smile wider and more triumphant than ever. She was the queen of her newly conquered kingdom. I stayed out of sight, just a shadow behind my own window. I watched them set up a podium and a sound system. I watched the local news van arrive. They were creating the perfect stage, not for their victory, but for their downfall. As Marla walked toward the microphone to begin her speech, I stood up from my chair and picked up the folder on my table. It contained everything: the original deed, the certified copy, the re-recorded version with the new coordinates, Ralph's report, photos of the benchmark, everything. I felt a profound sense of calm. All the anger, the frustration, the humiliation of the past months had been forged into this single, quiet purpose. It was time. As I walked out my door and started toward the crowd, I whispered to myself, time to pull the pin. I walked through the crowd with a purpose they hadn't seen from me before. People parted ways, their expressions a mix of confusion and annoyance. They were here for a party, and I was the ghost at the feast. Marla was at the podium, beaming, the microphone amplifying her voice across the newly manicured lawns. The local news camera was rolling, live streaming her moment of glory. A triumph of community vision, she was saying, her words dripping with self-congratulation. When we started this project, there were naysayers. There were those who clung to the past, who couldn't see the bright future we were building. But we persevered. A smattering of polite applause followed. That was my cue. I didn't rush. I walked at a steady, deliberate pace right up to the side of the stage. The two clipboard lackeys from our first meeting moved to intercept me, but they stopped short, uncertain. I wasn't shouting or making a scene. I just looked like an old man with a folder. Marla's eyes narrowed when she saw me. A flash of anger crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a condescending smile for the cameras. "Well, look who it is," she said into the microphone. "Mr. Halpern, have you come to congratulate us?" The crowd chuckled. I didn't answer her directly. I stepped up beside the podium, into the camera's frame, and opened my folder. The air grew still. The murmuring died down. Every eye was on me. I held up the first document, a certified copy of the original deed, its paper thick and official-looking. My voice, when I spoke, didn't need the microphone. It was calm, clear, and carried the weight of absolute fact. Lot 7B, Peninsula, Lakeview County, registered in 1983 to Thomas Halpern, still active. I placed it on the podium in front of her. Then I held up the second document, the newly re-recorded deed with Ralph's precise survey coordinates. Lot 7B, Peninsula, Lakeview County, re-recorded and certified last month with modern GPS coordinates, anchored to the official county benchmark. Still active, and still mine. Gasps rippled through the audience. This wasn't a dusty map. These were legally binding documents, fresh from the county clerk's office. Marla stared at the papers, her triumphant smile frozen on her face. Her mind was racing, trying to find a way to spin this, to dismiss it as another trick. "This is absurd," she stammered, grabbing the microphone. "This is a desperate stunt. Security! Someone get this man off the stage!" But nobody moved. My timing had been perfect. I had invited a couple of guests of my own. A young, hungry reporter from the county paper, whom I'd fed the story to a week prior, stepped forward with his own camera, and, standing near him, was a man in a county official's jacket, a senior field assessor Henry had called in as a favor. The assessor stepped up to the second microphone, which had been set up for the city council members. "I can confirm," the man said, his voice professional and unimpeachable. "The benchmark located at the edge of this property is active and is the legal point of origin for this parcel. Any construction east of that marker is, according to our official records, an encroachment on private property." The reporter's camera flashed. The word encroachment hung in the air, cold and devastating. The entire legal foundation of their project had just evaporated, live on camera. Marla's face went from pale to beet red. The mask of the calm, competent community manager shattered. "He's lying! This is harassment! Deputy, do something!" She pointed a shaking finger at a uniformed officer standing at the edge of the crowd. Deputy Carl Bishop. I'd known Carl since he was a kid chasing frogs by the lake. He used to fish off my dock with his dad. He was a good man who had no patience for bullies. Carl walked forward slowly, his expression unreadable. Marla's face flooded with relief. She thought he was coming to save her. He walked right past me, stopped at the edge of the stage, and looked up at her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of the law. "According to the county assessor and these certified documents, you're the one on private property. I suggest you and your guests vacate the premises." The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. The humiliation was total, public, and undeniable. Marla's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The board members behind her were in a state of panic, whispering frantically to each other, avoiding eye contact. Their paper kingdom had just crumbled. One of them, a lawyer in a rumpled suit, finally found his voice. "We'll sue you for this," he blustered, pointing a finger at me. "This is slander, tortious interference." I looked at him, then at the 31 brand new, beautifully finished cabins, all sitting on land that wasn't theirs. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. For the first time in months, I turned back to the microphone. "You can't sue," I said, my voice calm and final, "from land you don't own." The aftermath was not a storm, but a quiet, steady dismantling. The fallout from that disastrous ribbon-cutting ceremony was immediate and catastrophic for the HOA. The video, filmed by the local news and quickly uploaded, went viral in our small community. The story was simple and devastating. Veterans' land stolen by HOA. With the public humiliation, the entire edifice of Marla Trent's power collapsed. Within a week, the county dispatched a formal survey crew. They spent 2 days on the peninsula, planting new stakes and taking precise measurements. Their official report was a carbon copy of what Ralph and I already knew: all 31 cabins, the new road, and the utility lines had been built on my deeded land. The legal term they used was bad faith encroachment, meaning the HOA couldn't even claim it was an honest mistake. Not after I'd warned them at that public meeting. The legal hand grenade I'd kept in my pocket, the quiet title action, was finally filed. The court ruling was swift and final. The title to my land was cleared of all competing claims, and the 31 cabins were legally declared encroachments on my property. Under state law, that meant they now belonged to me. The HOA's multi-million-dollar investment was gone, transferred to me in the stroke of a judge's pen. Their problems were just beginning. The insurance company that had backed the project immediately voided their policy, citing gross negligence and misrepresentation of the property lines. Suddenly, the HOA was on the hook for the entire construction loan with no assets to show for it. Panic turned to betrayal as board members turned on one another. During the county's investigation into the permit fraud, using the wrong parcel ID for every filing, a quiet hero emerged. The HOA secretary, a mousy woman named Dee, who I'd seen taking notes at every meeting, came forward as a whistleblower. She provided investigators with meeting recordings and internal emails showing that Marla had knowingly pushed the project forward, forging signatures on several key documents and falsifying permit applications to bypass proper review. 2 weeks after her moment of triumph, Marla Trent was arrested. I saw the picture in the paper. No power suit, no smug smile, just a woman in handcuffs, looking small and defeated, being led out of her house. The charges were serious. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement of HOA funds. She had not only stolen my land on paper, but she had been skimming off the top of the construction budget. Her kingdom had been built on a foundation of lies, and it had crumbled into dust. I had no interest in being a landlord for 31 cabins. That wasn't the point. This was never about money. It was about restoration. Working with a reputable real estate agent, I put the cabins up for sale. Not as HOA-controlled rentals, but as private property, free and clear. The demand was high, and they sold quickly. With the proceeds, I established a scholarship fund at the local community college in Eleanor's name. It was designated for veterans and their children who wanted to learn a skilled trade: carpentry, electrical, surveying, the men and women who build things the right way. It felt like the perfect tribute to her, turning the ugliest chapter of my life into something that would build a better future for others. My neighbors started to come around, one by one. They'd show up at my gate, hesitant, offering apologies. They had been afraid of Marla, caught up in the group mentality. I didn't hold any grudges. Fear makes people do things they aren't proud of. I just nodded and accepted, and soon, the invisible wall between my property and the community came down. The quiet solidarity of neighbors helping neighbors began to return. This morning, I sat on my dock at dawn, a warm cup of coffee in my hands. The water was still, reflecting the soft colors of the rising sun. The chain-link fence is gone. The sound of construction is gone. The peace has returned. Two kids from a few houses down were at the end of the dock, casting their fishing lines into the water, their quiet chatter a welcome replacement for the roar of bulldozers. I had saved the cabin, I had honored my wife's memory, and I had restored not just my property line, but a sense of order and justice. Sometimes justice takes time. It requires patience and precision. Sometimes, to prove a point, you have to let them build it first. They thought they were building cabins on my land, but what they were really building was the lesson they, and this whole community, will never forget.